This is the end, my only friend, the end of...
Jim Morrison's fire burned brightly but briefly. The lead singer of The Doors was just 27 when he died back in 1971. All these years later, as John Blackstone tells us, we're still uncovering untold chapters of Jim Morrison's lyrical life.
Let's try this. Wow.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Wow, so this is cold storage.
It is. It's cold.
In a highly secure, climate-controlled vault in Los Angeles, and Morrison Chewning is a guardian of some significant rock and roll history. The Jim Morrison Archive.
It is. That's what we got.
Her brother, Jim Morrison, lead singer of The Doors, died 50 years ago. He was just 27. But he left behind boxes filled with journals, poems,
Riders on the storm.
handwritten lyrics of what would become hit songs. Looks like an album cover almost.
I know.
photo,
It
doesn't
could be.
There's Morrison's passport and family photos.
Here's Jim and his cousin
At a door.
at a door.
How old was he when he drew that?
He was probably 18.
And a drawing he made of his younger sister.
Jim self-published his own books.
Chewning has now put much of what she found in the vault into a nearly 600-page book, The Collected Works of Jim Morrison. As well as lyrics and journals, the book includes poetry by Morrison never before published. Growing up, he seemed destined to be a poet, which Chewning didn't think was a good idea.
No, who thinks their brother can make it as a poet, you know?
Morrison suddenly became famous in 1967 with The Doors' first hit, Light My Fire. It happened so fast, Chewning didn't even realize who she was hearing on the radio.
I got a package from my mom. It was just an album cover, and I opened it up, and the front was my brother, front and center. And so I knew then that he was Jim Morrison of The Doors.
How surprised were you?
Awestruck. I mean, who would have guessed it?
Morrison had just graduated from film school at UCLA when another graduate, keyboard player Ray Manzarek, invited him to form a band. Manzarek died in 2013.
Jim was over there in the vocal booth.
We met the two remaining members of The Doors, drummer John Densmore and guitarist Robby Krieger, at the studio where they recorded their first album in 1966.
I was over there. You were right around here somewhere. Ray was right around here. It took how long? A few weeks?
At the most.
So Light My Fire was recorded in here?
Yes, it was.
Sure. And it's been downhill ever since.
Well, not exactly.
To the other side.
From the late 60s to the early 70s, The Doors released hit
Hello, I love you, won't you tell me your name?
after hit.
Come on, come on, come on, come on, now touch me, babe.
They sold more than 100 million records worldwide. In live performances, Morrison, usually dressed in leather pants, could be electrifying and unpredictable. He was arrested twice for his exploits on stage, including a conviction for indecent exposure during a concert in Miami.
Alcohol came into the picture, you know.
Drugs, too. On July 3rd, 1971, Morrison was found dead in the bathtub of the apartment where he was living in Paris. The official cause was heart failure, but there was no autopsy. Would The Doors have been The Doors without Jim Morrison?
No. For one thing, he came up with the name. You know, he read a lot of poetry. Blake, who said, you know, if the doors of perception were cleansed, then you'd see things as they really are, infinite.
The doors of perception.
You know, Jim was the kind of guy who would know about that stuff. So he came up with The Doors, really? I thought it was a dumb name. I didn't get it.
What kind of musician was Jim Morrison?
Well, he wasn't really a musician. He was more of a word musician, magician. You know, he could plink on the piano a little bit.
Very little.
This is the end.
It's like a concert being played in his head.
He said to me that he he thought of melodies to remember the words. So that's really a gift.
You know that it would be untrue.
Morrison wrote many of the band's songs, but not Light My Fire.
That was my song. I wrote those words, most of them.
The poetry book should have "Our love become a funeral pyre," which was the one line Jim added to Robby's song.
Well, the other line he added was, try to set the night on fire.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because at the end I was just going, "Come on, baby, light my fire." And he says, "Hey, let's change it to try and set the night on fire."
Nice.
Try to set the night on fire.
Turns out that was a line Morrison had written sometime earlier in a notebook as part of a poem. He wrote on everything.
Yeah, envelopes and napkins. He's the classic writer you read about, right?
One of the pages Chewning found seemed like a message from her brother.
Here's the one that inspired me. Plan for book. I thought he wanted to do it, so I guess we can do it, So that's when we started.
One thing fans will discover is under the dust jacket. Hard to see, perhaps, but it says
James Douglas Morrison. Because Jim published a lot of his own things in that name.
And do you think Jim would have been happier in some ways being James Douglas Morrison, poet, rather than Jim Morrison, rock star?
Well, sometimes he spoke of it himself a couple of ways, and he said maybe he wouldn't mind have been just a poet in a garden, in a little house. But then he also said, the past few years, I'd never have met so many people and done so many things without being in the band. So I think he was of two minds.
In Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris, Morrison's grave is in what's known as the Poets' Corner. 50 years later, it remains a place of pilgrimage for fans.
I thought after the last album and then Jim passing away, I thought nobody's going to care about the Doors 2 years from now. It's all over.
It's like some psychedelic dream we had years ago. We're still in it.
Riders on the storm. Riders on the storm. Into this house we're born. Into this world we're thrown.